Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 19, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Ron Reeder. Where in the heck you calling in from, Rod?
Houston, Texas, specifically my apartment in the Heights.
In the Heights.
Yeah. Sort of on the central north side.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Off the top of my head, the best thing for a human being is, I don't know if it's achievable, but to achieve their full potential as a human being. I'm kind of somewhere along the line was inspired by what Noam Chomsky has to say, and I think he was coming at it from the point of view as a linguist and a social dissident, that human beings need to have creative work, and that's how we ought to spend our lives, trying to to be creative people, to whatever that might mean. And it's I taught high school theater for some years ago, and I really started thinking about the human potential for creativity and how it just seems to be quashed in everyone, and it's like you're really lucky if you end up having a desire to go into a creative field or even create your own sort of opportunities for creativity. There's that Kurt Vonnegut quote that keeps floating around on Facebook where he's just like, here's my recommendation. I suppose he was talking, I'm not sure who he was talking to, but just like do do something creative, do it as well as you can, because that's kind of the meaning of life, and beyond achieving your potential as a sort of human creator. I'm, haven't been a Christian for many years, but it's kind of hard to take the church out of the boy. And I think that we should all love one another,
Yeah, that's good, Ron. It's funny because a lot of people say, what's the best thing for a human being? They say love. But just recently, I do 4 of these a week. People have been saying to achieve your full potential. So that's a good thing. I agree with you and Chomsky. And what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
That's an interesting question. Different forms of information have different pluses and minuses. I've thought, what is it? The writer Chris Hedges, and I'm not sure which. Maybe it was Empire of Illusion is the book where he talks about our culture moving from a print-based culture into the age of the electronic image. And, I've studied theater, I've studied radio, television, and film, both at the University of Texas and then later at Louisiana State. And their reading is contemplative. It is a thought process as you read through whatever somebody has written for you, versus the electronic image, which is almost entirely emotional. I'm getting different things from different forms of information. It's one of the really tough things is that I studied radio, television, and film, and so I have a really massive critique of television news media, as well as print news media. But I think that just for the information itself, I prefer reading it. But
did you hold on? Hold on. Did you grow up a reader because your parents told you to read? They did it as an example, or on your own?
My mother read to me when I was very little, and it's there. Hard to say, I was getting messages both from my family at home and from school, which was, pushing you must read, and various programs set up, read this many books, get this many gold stars, and you get, I don't know, recognition as having read a lot. But it was definitely, definitely I was getting the message that I should read from all around me, going back to around the age 4, 5, 6 years old.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Because it tells us who we are. In the end, it's I think it is an identity thing.
Yeah.
If you go back to, well, the beginning of writing, which is predated by an oral culture, before even that, and so much of that oral tradition moving into writing is about who are we. I've been watching a lot of documentaries about the ancient Israelites and looking at the archaeological point of view versus the theologian's point of view, and it's just what's the archaeological point of view is that the Exodus never happened, that maybe there was a group of people who ended up joining with the Israelites that were living in Egypt and came out, but not the entire nation, right? That it turned out that it was that the Israelites are actually Canaanites who had been cast off during the Bronze Age collapse, went and lived up in the bad land that was not as farmable up in the mountains, and kind of developed this big chip on their shoulder toward the rest of the Canaanites, which is, so it's like you kind of look at what's the oral tradition coming out of that. Well, it's that they, committed genocide against the entire nation of Canaan, which didn't happen. The Canaanites turned into the Israelites, but they came up with a story, expressing perhaps, well, we were kicked out of Canaanite society. Yeah. So, and along with that, my understanding of the beginnings of writing, the beginnings of numbers were about keeping track of agriculture,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're going to get into this. This is good. You're a deep thinker and you're articulate. I appreciate this.
Oh, thank you.
Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate. I think that when I was getting certified to teach high school, I took a cognitive psychology class that looked at both the psychology and the neuroscience of how humans receive information, and it's like it's almost as though we are set up as information gathering machines. That we have our five senses, and then we have a brain to continually be processing all of that information input. So I don't really know, but I would imagine that coming out, from a sort of evolutionary point of view, that we want to know things. We've got to know things. And so I think it's on board. Yeah.
Do thoughts create emotions?
No, emotions come before thoughts. I'm pretty sure about that. What was I've been reading lately in cognitive psychology that it's sort of an argument that we don't even really have free will, right? That we go and we do things, and that our minds are really good at sort of creating justifications for what we already wanted to do.
Ron, that used to be seeing is believing, and they switched it. Believing is seeing.
Yeah.
You believe what you're. So it's funny. Now fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
Oh my. I don't know what I think or what I'm going to say I think until I've processed it, taken a look at whatever, opinion I'm trying to come up with from multiple points of view, and then decide, so that's a really blank, sorry, man.
Yeah. No, that's good. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion said, I don't know what I think until I write it. But I like yours. I don't know what I think until I process it.
Yeah.
Humans think without language.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Because we think in so many images. What was it I heard recently about the interior monologue and how most people have it, but some people don't? It's a conscious process of their, having to sit down and talk through something. And I think that might kind of tie into it a little bit, but it's just, I don't know. I'm so influenced by my work in the theater and my study of acting, and so so much of that for being a good actor, or at least in the American style of acting, is that you want to feel it, and you don't. If you're up there thinking about how you're talking, about what's going on in the scene, if you're it's my teacher at LSU, a guy named John Dennis, sort of a Stanislavskian, that all the thought processing work is before you go on the stage. And once you go on the stage, you are in an emotional, sort of pre-language relationship with your scene partners. And it's like, and having been there, and knowing that it's just like, I've got these lines I'm going to say, and I've got these marks I'm going to hit as far as my movement is concerned. Otherwise, I'm just trying to feel what's happening and to be honest and authentic in my emotions. Maybe I'm overly biased by that, but I get the sense that what I've accomplished is as an actor, is that's kind of going on with everybody.
Yeah. No, and we I found you through your YouTube channel where you talk about Frank Zappa. And when I interviewed Don Preston, one of Frank's early keyboardists, he said, when he's playing music, don't think. Yeah. It's like, well, it's a high aspiration. You still have to think, but
right.
But back to you anticipating Chomsky. He says a language is not just words. It's a culture. It's a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
For me personally, in sort of like individual interaction situations, it means either walk away because this is messed up, or go back to the drawing board. That it's like I'm hitting a wall here. It's like I said, sometimes it's best just to give up, and other times it's like, well, no, I need to try to figure out what's the best thing to say to this person to get across what I'm saying. I mean, that's sort of my YouTube show, Ron Reeder Digs the Universe. That's right, Ron Reeder Digs the Universe. Is a sort of grand project for me in multiple ways, but one of them is, what's the best argument that I can make that is going to get conservatives to listen to me? Of course, the big problem there is that conservatives don't listen to arguments anymore, so
yeah.
But I do. I keep going back to the drawing board on that, and it's like, will this startle them? Will this break through to them? Because obviously they're not listening to straight up arguments,
Yeah, it's high aspiration to find commonality among people, to have true communication, and divide and conquer is a big thing. That's a lot about what this whole interview is me and you versus the way the questions are worded. So I always like critiques on, well, you could refine that question, or I can answer it another way, or whatever, because the next question is your observations of humans in general. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
It's in keeping with a lot of the stuff I've already been saying. I think that we're much more feeling beings than we're thinking beings. I've been saying this for a few years now, that logic is something that must take effort, right? It's not a natural thing. Logic is and reasonability. These are constructed ideas, and they work extraordinarily well for all kinds of stuff, but it's not our natural state. Our natural state is, emotional reaction to the stimulus that we get from our environment, and it's in some ways kind of a shame, but in other ways, again, as an actor, I enjoy my emotional life, even the pain. It's in retrospect, not at the time that I'm
experiencing. You can tell it. Your channel shows you being passionate about these subjects, and that could attract people to listen, whether they agree or not.
The Greek rhetorical notion of ethos, which I forget what the 4 points you got to have for rhetoric, but ethos, just how you come off as a human being. In terms of just making the simple argument. I've heard has been a big criticism of Democrats for a long time, who feel like you should just be able to make the argument, lay out the facts, and it's like, and are confounded again and again because, well, that doesn't work, So yeah.
It's the art of persuasion. You can't give up. You just go, they won't listen. It's like, no, don't give up. Find another way for them to stick their foot in their mouth, or to have an epiphany and revelation and switch thinking.
Yes.
Because it's like Cindy Sheehan said so well. She goes, we're just talking to the choir, and there ain't even a choir. And so, anyways, here's 2 questions from Alan Turing, 1950s.
Oh, all right.
Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, that begs the question of the existence of the soul, and what the nature of the soul is. And, theologians have been going up and down on this concept for at least a couple thousand years, if not more. But let's say that there is such a thing as the soul, in order to answer your question. And let us assume that the soul is your essential nature as a human being, which suggests that, probably thinking is a product that rises up from the soul. Just off the
Good.
top of my head.
The second Turing question is, can machines think?
That remains an open question. Because we got all this AI news going on right now, and it's all the experts are saying, well, no, AI isn't thinking, it's doing this and this and this and this and this. But I'm a big science fiction fan, so I'm waiting for HAL 9000 to come and lock the pod bay doors. Or it might be wonderful. It is these Isaac Asimov these robot stories that he wrote about these humaniform robots and their, slow evolution toward a sort of sentience of some sort, and Commander Data on Star Trek The Next Generation, all of these things. I mean, I think that it might be a possibility if you consider that the human is a biological machine. But I mean, that's metaphor too, I mean, it's like, it's not, biology and, machines are crafted by human beings, and biology just kind of springs up from nature. So I like to think that we will eventually create some sort of artificial sentience of some sort, and we'll see how that affects humanity when it happens.
Yeah, and having the Deadhead shirt on and getting together through your interest in Zappa, it begs the question, have you ever read Theodore Sturgeon's novel More Than Human?
I have not. I've read, I think, at least, I can't even remember what it was. I mean, I know Theodore Sturgeon from his work on Star Trek, and I think he did a Twilight Zone episode or 2, and I think I've read one of his books, but not the one you just mentioned.
Well, the reason I brought it up is it's Phil Lesh and Frank Zappa's favorite book.
Oh, wow.
I'm always curious for somebody like you who knows sci-fi and knows these two musicians, how it crosses over. So anyways, grounds for further research. So do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I more pursue meaning. I think that, I don't know, you're told here in America, the pursuit of happiness, but it's, I forget, I read some essay somewhere, maybe on Salon years ago, that was saying, don't pursue happiness. What you need to pursue is meaning. And that really spoke to me, that happiness is something that comes and goes. It's a sort of, it's an essential part of being human. And if happiness is not a permanent state, you also need other emotional realities to which to compare your happiness for it to even make sense. It's, to this whole, it's, going back to my Southern Baptist background, going to heaven. Well, what will heaven be like, where you're happy all the time? I can't imagine that. And it actually kind of sounds pretty horrible, I mean, if you're happy all the time, then you're a sort of Stepford wife zombie.
It's the joke where the guy goes to hell and he's standing there in front of hell, and the devil says, he looks in before he gets in hell, and he looks in, and they have Wi-Fi Zoom with chatbot in hell, and the guy goes, "You have Zoom in hell?" And the devil goes, "That's all we have."
Nice. Yeah.
So does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I think it's very likely that consciousness is a construction of the brain. And that, I say that I took a cognitive psychology class. I took some educational psychology class when I was getting certified to teach. And especially my cognitive psychology professor talked about when we discuss the mind is a construction that allows us to talk about thinking, and so it seems to me that consciousness must necessarily arise from the biological reality of the brain.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Well, probably the speed of light, because the speed of thought can never, the speed of thought might be at the speed of light, but it's like whatever happens, the speed of light is going to be the boundary for anything to happen. And our brain is neurochemical responses, which says to me that likely it's going to be going at least a little bit more slowly than photons racing through the universe.
Very good. Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Her colleague Yvonne Rainer responded, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
Let's go. Can you repeat that question?
Sure. Audre Lorde said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools.
Okay.
Yvonne Rainer said you can if you expose the tools. The basic question is what new tool do you suggest?
Goodness me. That's a really broad and encompassing sort of, because it's like, what in this question, what is the master's house? Who is the master? What tools is the master using?
Yeah, and Ron, this is a good example. You put the questions into the context you want,
sure,
because there's a lot implied there. And just because I open some of these questions with cute quotes doesn't even mean you have to apply it. The basic question really is what tool do you gravitate towards? What tool do you suggest? But you can add the word new, and you can say, to dismantle the master's house too. So again, it's you putting into the context you want.
Well, I will say this. Here's something that the question reminds me of. I have a friend in Austin who is a green realtor, and she's wonderful. I went to studied film and television with her at the University of Texas. She's very likely as far to the left as I am. Hence, you don't get into a career as a green realtor unless you believe in what you're doing. And I, without thinking, at some point on Facebook years ago, disparaged the notion of green realty and all kinds of other, friendly consumer products that are supposed to help with the environment. And my thinking on that is you can't use capitalism to fight capitalism. That really green realty is just a niche field of realty, but it's still selling property, buying and selling. It's hybrid cars. So individual consumer choices are using capitalism to fight capitalism, right? Yeah. And all that capitalism does is just it takes it and it turns it into itself. And so that would be an example of trying to use the master's tools to dismantle what the master has built. Yeah. And at least in this particular sense, it strikes me as a dead end. There's not going to be any way that we can use consumer choices to end global warming, say.
Yeah. So, what new toy do you suggest?
Gosh, I, I'm, I, I like Legos. If that makes any sense. I mean, it's like thinking in terms of what are the toys I like to play with. And it generally it's stuff that is it is creative in nature, which Legos are for that. I mean, that's kind of been the thing. I mean, I'm not like obsessed with Legos or anything like that, but just it's like from time to time.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, I mean, you can spend hours just creating stuff, and it's especially fun to play with Lego with children because their creativity is really wide open at that particular point. So
yeah.
I don't know, some toy that is creative, something that makes you think and feel and create things.
Very good. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Sometimes it's paying the rent. That's like since I kind of got out of the middle class and the bourgeois, quit teaching and just decided that I was going to be a waiter and sort of ply whatever my artistic trade means to me on my own. Paying the rent, paying bills is my one source of stress in life. I like my job and I generally make enough money. I'm 55 years old now, and I'm starting to have, the standard health problems that you get when you're, in your mid 50s going into your 60s, and had a little crisis last fall. That set me back. I was really lucky to have some help from my dad on that. But yeah, it's huge, and I have brought that into my work, as a sort of video blogger on Ron Reeder Digs the Universe about economic anxiety. That my assumption, I'm not the only one, and I'm lucky because I've got a bourgeois dad to help me out who's still alive and kicking. And it's like having been in the working class for over a decade now, seeing other, it's like, God, so many of the people that I work with in the restaurant industry, it's like, I finish my shift and go home. They finish their shift and go to work in another restaurant,
Wow.
and it's like, what is the party that I can support that's going to make it so that we only work one job, And it's like, there is no party. It's like everybody's in on it, all of the establishment. It's like you must work and work and work and work and work and work and work. And even if you don't make enough money to pay rent, too effing bad. This is America, buddy. So that's my biggest fear. Other things are sort of more abstract. Like where is the country headed? And I'm genuinely afraid of that. But that's not the kind of that doesn't keep me up at night. It's like I kind of exercise my demons about that with my work online.
Very good. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Ron, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Okay, that's a really interesting question for which I have an immediate response. I number one, art is marginalized in our culture. By and large, most people's experience with anything that we might call art is mediated through gigantic media corporations. So much so that I think that it sort of quashes people's creativity because they think that art is something that somebody else does. And you're not gonna have anything coming out of corporate mass media that really questions the concept of the corporate system. It's like you might get some questions here and there about little specifics, but nothing that's looking at what's happening overall. That there's an overall narrative coming down from all that, fiction, movies, television shows, news media. There is an overall narrative that by and large says this is the way it is, this is the way it has to be. I think what is it? Going back to my RTF classes, radio, television, film. Cultural hegemony is a notion of rule by the notion of the way things are is because that's the way things are. Yeah. And I think that the sort of information and art gatekeepers of our society have a massive stake in keeping the status quo to their advantage. Now, that I answered one part of your question, but now I've forgotten what the first part of your question
was. Well, why do we ignore that's what the artists do? We ignore it because art is marginalized. Is that your answer, or what?
I think so. I think so. And even so, I think that the people who are consumers of what we would call art that's not corporate in nature. I mean, it's like I think a lot about small theater, for instance, which is where I've done most of my work, and it's like it's the same crowd. Very, going to everything. Very rarely, I think, do small theaters try to expand their audiences to people who don't go to the theater, and so there's all of these people who go to the theater, who go to art galleries and art openings and whatnot. That's part of who they've decided that their identity is. I'm the kind of person who is a patron of the arts. I'm the kind of person who checks it out. And that is just such a tiny fraction of the population, so it's what we've got going on is something I think that appeals to, that caters to these people. Well, because those are the butts that are going to go. I mean, it makes sense too, because theater ain't free. Those are the people that are paying the tickets, and those are the butts that are going to be in the seats. And how are you going to compete with, Game of Thrones, a really excellent show where you can just stay at home and stream it? How do you compete with, massive corporate sporting events that are, of course, exciting and fun? And, what are people doing on their Friday and Saturday nights? Going to bars and stuff. And that's what most people are going and doing, and most of the fans of different art forms, that's not most people. That's a small group of people.
Yeah. Ron, do artists have moral obligation?
Yes. Yeah. And I remember years ago in an acting class I had at the University of Texas where we had a class discussion about this. And it's like, I was even still kind of conservative back then. I grew up conservative and Southern Baptist in this, bourgeois community of Kingwood. But even so, I think it was having grown up, seeing musicians, for instance, getting involved in politics and issues, Zappa, John Lennon, etc., and all of the huge, you're older than I am. Did you know that my generation, Generation X, sort of grew up in the shadow of the 60s, that it was just like everything? And it's like even the conservative signals that I was getting as a kid sort of couldn't keep up with that. So I had a strong, it's like, look, man, we're artists, we've got, what's the point? What are we doing here? Are we just here to make people feel happy and feel good about themselves? Which is, that's legit. That's freaking legitimate, of just like, here's something that's gonna, ease the just the real misery and pain and difficulty of existence. And damn it, I've lost my train of thought.
But you're anticipating a bunch of questions coming up, so let's go on. Right. Yeah. What are you more afraid of, new ideas or old ideas?
It depends on the idea. But I'm, there are awesome old ideas and there are awesome new ideas, just as there are horrible old and horrible new ideas. That it's kind of, we can look back into the past and see, well, in the past, they did it this particular way. Slavery, for instance, oppression of women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And arguably, we're in a more enlightened time, although I don't know about that anymore, given where politics have been heading. But yeah, I don't make such a distinction between new and old. It really depends. You got to judge every, idea on its own merits.
Very good. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yes. visual, and hard to say whether or not it's me sort of recycling a memory of a memory, if that makes any sense to you.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I have some really, like I'm thinking maybe based on where my family was living at the time and the images, I have, good Lord, I must have been 2 years old. I remember when my younger brother was born. My dad takes my mom to the hospital. They dropped off me and my older brother at our aunt's house, who was taking care of this while the deed was going on. And I remember we had peanut butter sandwiches and Cheetos. So that has got to be the earliest memory that I can definitely say. I was definitely 2 years old. I definitely remember that. Go ahead.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
It's a blessing. It just has to be. I don't see how we could progress or do anything as a species without memory, and it's, yeah, I mean, it's painful to deal with some of our own personal memories, regrets that we have, trauma, for instance, which is more than just, I mean, trauma is much more than simply a memory. I mean, it's trauma gets in and rewires the circuitry of your brain in particular ways. But generally, memory in and of itself, it's like we wouldn't know not to put our hand in the fire every time without memory. You know what I'm saying?
Ron, tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Somebody in my family and then somebody not in my family?
Yeah, someone in your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly. Yeah,
sure. I'll give my father props for getting me to think about big issues, I think, before most of my peers were. And again, my dad, to this day, very, very, very conservative man. And in a lot of ways, I've, lost him in terms of being able to communicate with him on, so many different subjects. But the guy always has had an interest in, for instance, I'm a big fan of Richard Nixon, even though I acknowledge everything he did that was wrong. And frankly, going into the Trump era, one is a little nostalgic for, average, ordinary, run-of-the-mill corruption. But it's like the impeachment was going on, or the movement up toward the impeachment that didn't happen was going on. When was that? 72, 73? I must have been 4 or 5 years old. I remember my dad had the radio on. We're driving around in the car, and they say something about the president being impeached. And my thought was, hey, he's the president. He's our leader. What does impeachment mean? I thought it had something to do with peaches. My dad's like, they want to throw him out of office, And he sat me down and in front of a lot of great movies. I must have seen Dr. Strangelove at the age of 7 or 8. So I'm bringing all of these ideas up, and it's just like he taught me to think about saw Patton. My dad, a big World War II fan, and this is probably a bad idea, but I don't think it really messed me up. He had me watching World at War documentary episodes. It's Laurence Olivier narrated it, and they used all this actual footage from World War II. And I watched the Liberation of the concentration camps episode, which was mind-boggling to me. I didn't really quite perceive what I was watching. There's some footage of all of these corpses that are just being bulldozed and moved around. It's just I just wow. But it's early on, 4 or 5 years old. I'm just like, wow, humanity can be really inhumane to mankind, So my dad would a huge influence. That he would listen to big band, and I think that was the beginning of my love of jazz.
Nice. So now outside your immediate family.
Yeah, I think I had a professor at the University of Texas, the late Lynn Sobieski, and she was awesome. She younger baby boomer, but it was, talking about, the shadow of the cultural shadow of the 1960s. I was kind of in awe of her because, she had been sort of a hippie type and sort of brought that in to, 87, I think, when she taught me, 87 or 88 or so. And she was the one who I think really got my brain churning in terms of intellectuality. It's like, to this day, I hear her voice in my head saying, what does this mean? What does this mean?
Yeah.
We got this and this and this and this, and what does it add up to? How does it affect us? Lynn Sobieski, she was awesome. I love her, and it was a shame that she passed away too young.
Well put, Ron. You're very articulate. I appreciate this. So you were raised Southern Baptist.
Correct.
Do you pray?
Not really. I consider myself to be an agnostic. And from that point of view, it's, I asked the question, well, could this all-powerful, all-knowing entity exist, and because he's all-powerful, hide all evidence of his existence? Well, yeah, sure, of course. But it's not just that. It's like I've got to take my experience as a Southern Baptist seriously. I think, it's like going back, what was I told that was happening to me versus what was actually happening to me. And there were moments that I look back on where I really did feel like I was experiencing the touch of the divine. And even many, many, many years later, after I had, renounced being a Christian, definitely renounced the Southern Baptists, and was an agnostic, my mother passed away. And so I go back. I was living in New Orleans at the time. I go back to Kingwood for a week or so for all of the associated activities that happens when one of your parents dies. And the church, in which I grew up was doing the, bring food every night. Because my dad was there. My dad was, of course, totally freaked out. So they would bring food, and there would be a prayer. There was a particular prayer in which I participated where like maybe 8 of us joined hands in my parents' kitchen, and this, one of the church deacons led us in a prayer. And that was a particular moment later where I'm like, allowing myself to really participate in the cultural experience. And I felt the touch of the divine at that point, and it's like, so you compare that to, neurologists have found what they think is the religious ecstatic neurological reaction in the brain and whatnot. And it's like, I've had arguments with atheists who like to make fun of me, and it's like, I make fun of their certainty because, the best an atheist can say is that there is no evidence of, and it's like, well, okay, that agreed. But it's like, there is also this human experience, which is real. We don't know what to attribute it to, which we should attribute it. Where does it come from? Perhaps it's all just biological in nature, but it is significant, and so
Ron,
go ahead.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I am now going to reveal to you perfect knowledge. That's what I would like God to say to me. It's like I'm friends with a directing professor I had many years ago, again at the University of Texas. I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he posted something about different phobias, just some sort of meme. This is the fear of this, the fear of that, and one of them was, I forget the phobia name, but was the fear of not knowing how everything is going to turn out. Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I have that. I'm afraid I'm not going to know how I'm going to die before the story's over, and I'm never, ever going to see what happens, and he's like, okay, me too.
Well, perfect inset for this. Hollis Frampton, experimental filmmaker, said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
I don't think so. I think they say that we're the only animals who are aware of our mortality. I don't know, but we learn more and more about the intelligence of it. Like octopi are supposed to be highly intelligent. It's the notion of the elephant graveyard. That's really interesting. I mean, because Jerome Bruner, the psychologist Jerome Bruner, who I read an essay he wrote when I was studying film called The Narrative Construction of Reality, where he asserts that humans organize their experience by way of narrative. And it's like when the first time I read that, I'm like, oh, yeah. And that's, and I like that too, for having, studied film and being a theater artist and whatnot. It's like, we tell stories, and that's, we've all, human beings have always told stories before there was even writing. I imagine some of the first language was saying, hey, this happened to me, and telling the story of how it happened. So it seems likely that awareness of our mortality would be a really big deal in terms of the stories that we tell in order to organize our narrative. What's a meaningful death, what's a meaningless death, et cetera, et cetera.
Ron, what's Jerome's last name again? How do you spell it?
Bruner. I think it's simply Bruner. Might be two N's.
Yeah. And then do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I've been saying this lately. I have never seen an act of evil that needed Satan in order for it to happen. Evil as a concept, I think, is extraordinarily complicated. First one must define what evil is, and I can probably do a nice job of that. Here's a quick story. I had an aborted stint at getting a master's degree, just sort of a general master's degree at the University of Houston back in 1991, and I dropped out of the program because I didn't really like it that much. But something really fascinating happened. That there was a professor of mime, a Frenchman named Claude Coe, who had, in the August before the semester started, brutally stabbed to death in Herman Park this graduate student who they had been having an affair with one another. Did it in public in front of dozens of witnesses, that their affair had gone sour, and this guy, Claude Coe, went after this woman he had been seeing and just stabbed her to death, and then turned the knife, and she's lying dead on the ground, then turned the knife on himself, started stabbing himself. Onlookers were trying to stop everything and failed, and he was like saying, please, let us die, let us die. I mean, just incredibly dramatic. I read about it in the newspaper, and then the next week I'm in this theater department where the graduate student and the professor were both well-known and well-loved, and everybody's just sort of reeling from it. It just sort of affected the energy of the theater department. And I was taking a directing course taught by the then chairman of the department, a guy named Sidney Berger. I think he was a Shakespeare expert. I think he passed away. But he started we were talking about the nature of evil, and he addressed this, horrible murder that had happened. And eventually Claude Coe was able to kill himself when he was in the hospital. So boom, murder-suicide. And it was really awesome, because I think that it was one of the first non-Christian discussions of the nature of evil to which I had ever really been a part of. I mean, it's like, who are the people in our culture that really take evil seriously? Those would be the religious among us. And he asked this question. He's like, was Claude Coe, was what he did evil, or is he an evil man? And he followed up and he says he didn't think they're the same thing, that he thinks that a good man can do an evil thing, and not be an evil person. He's like, I knew Claude, I knew him well, I loved him. I don't think he's an evil man. He was seized by a passion of some sort, and so and I don't know. And I've also recognized sort of along those lines with myself. I had a nice bourgeois upbringing. Material concerns have never been in question for me until now, lately. I was telling you about being a waiter and worrying about paying the bills and everything. But generally, I've had a cush life, materialistically cush life with parents that loved me. There are so many other people who don't have that. Perhaps the majority, I think it's like something I've been saying lately is that everybody in the trailer park, everybody in the ghetto is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and so is the murderer in the street, who's stealing a purse and kills somebody. I mean, it's like you've got to look at his entire human experience to know whether or not we can say this is an evil guy. And I tell you this, somewhere along the line, he was victimized himself, which, doesn't remove his responsibility or anything. But in terms of understanding, Go ahead.
Understanding is the key word. And what you're doing is sussing out the big picture. And to tell you the truth, Ron, most people say that. They go, everyone's capable of being evil or doing evil act. But really the hidden question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the samurai and the mob. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I laugh when I'm just like, oh yeah, because so much of the way that we perceive enemies is, it's perception. How are we constructing the idea of this particular person who opposes us for whatever particular reason, and it's like, when you take that step of deciding this person's, they're off the list, I'm now going to work actively against this person, you've then sort of define how your life is working and what role this other person is playing in your life. And it's now a situation of opposition that you've got to deal with, versus walking away from it if you can, versus, trying to clear the air, there's so many different steps that you can take for dealing with a so-called enemy. And the first one is like, well, is this person actually an enemy? So, and I would prefer to have no enemies myself. Yeah.
Conflict resolution it goes along with the Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Then someone reacted to his thoughts and said, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, whoa, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
I don't think punishment works. I think that in the end, if you want to look at it in terms of the criminal justice system, we warehouse a lot of people in just fairly miserable circumstances, and some of them aren't so bad. Some of them just got caught, busted doing something wrong. Some of them are, real criminals, murderers and rapists and whatnot. Not enough white collar criminals in prison, if you ask me. But I've been asking this, why do we punish people? Do we really, is that correction? And no, it's not. I think that we have this punishment function in the criminal justice system because it makes other people feel good. They make it mean it's like, oh, well, this crime was punished. That's evil did not, so it's, I don't know, really, it seems like society has an interest in getting somebody who's going to hurt other people, damage other people, getting them off the streets until we can figure out, what we're going to do with them, making society safer, but punishing them, what's the point? I've never, I mean, it's like I tend to think of it more in terms of behavioral psychology, punishments and rewards. And it's like, well, you can get a human being to behave in a particular way because of punishments and rewards, but that's not really changing the individual. They're just responding to stimulus.
Yep. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, because going back to what I was saying before about the narrative construction of reality, that is, we have events happening in real life. And sometimes, a lot of the time, it's the event is on such a scale that we're really, how do we organize, how do we put together these particular events in order to have meaning? And you see the news media doing it. We see film and television doing it. And that sort of puts together in a much more digestible and understandable way, sort of the significance of various events, something that we can, like I said, digestible, that we can take into ourselves and consider sort of the essentials. But a story is always constructed too. So it's another individual or individuals telling you what to focus on, so then there's danger there. It's good and bad about it, but there is real life experience, and then there is the mediated experience.
And Ron, what was the tipping point for you to pursue acting and theater? You're growing up, your dad's showing you these cool movies, you're probably being exposed to theater and art. Where did you go? That's what I want to do. I want to pursue acting.
I was in high school theater and high school and middle school theater, I think it was third grade where I got on stage in some sort of Christmas pageant that my elementary school had. And, the moment I had an audience in front of me laughing at the jokes I was making, I was just like, oh my God, yeah, this is what it's about. But sort of struggled, I'm like, yeah, I really want to do this, but struggled with the notion that professional acting is, as they say, it's a sort of fool's errand. I've had friends that have had success, and I've had, and then like myself, I got close a couple of times, and I was trying to get into the film scene in New Orleans, but eventually just the whole thing became sickening to me, and I decided not to pursue that. But so where I was thinking by the time I was in high school is that I love this, but I should probably try to be a lawyer. And so I graduated high school, went to the University of Texas, and was studying government my first year with the idea that, okay, I'm going to get a government degree and then go to law school. And I took an acting class for non-majors and got to go and see some shows that the department there was doing, and was just heartsick. And I'm just like, screw it. This is what I want to study. And had to convince my parents, who were just like, no way. And I'm just like, well, you know what? I'm going to cut myself off. I'll go and do it on my own, whether you support me or not. And they supported me. And I think in a lot of ways, it was probably the best decision I've ever made in my entire life. That if I had gone down, well, I'd be a lawyer, and I would think like a lawyer. And I think that studying the arts has just so opened up my mind and broadened my horizons that I just never would have gone there if I hadn't done that. And I am, to this day, I'm in a dump of an apartment. I'm waiting tables, but I think I've really got the best possible world I can have right now.
That's cool. And I love your YouTube channel, and I know you perform songs on it.
Yeah.
What was the kick over where you're hearing music and you go, I can do that. I can write a song. Where was that tipping point? Was it
Well,
extension of
yeah,
the
yeah,
theater,
yeah.
or was it pre the theater?
It was simultaneous,
Yeah.
actually, in that roundabout fourth grade. So we're talking maybe 1977, 78. My older brother started listening to the Beatles, and I started being blown away by that. And so was to this day an enormous Beatles fan, and was found a friend of a friend had a band, right? And just they were awful. Nobody knew how to play their instruments, but they were playing instruments. They had some guitars, and they had a cheap drum kit, and so I joined in with them. I got a hold of my older brother's guitar that he was no longer playing, and showed up, and it was more like we were doing Beatles cosplay, and it just kept at that for about 4 or 5 years or so, and was increasingly taking it seriously, and I learned some chords on the guitar. Never stuck with it long enough to be particularly good, but I can certainly bang out chords and sing along and stuff like that. And then we graduated from high school, went our separate ways, went to university, started studying theater, but still had my guitar and was still writing songs, and just that has evolved along with me over the years. I've gone through particular periods where I'm in an open mic night frame of mind and just showing up with some of my original songs and doing a little set, and and brought it in for this show, just like that's something I can do, and it's kind of a hassle because I'm not terribly active with it. So whenever I'm going to do some of my songs to put on YouTube, I got to spend at least a couple of weeks rehearsing, getting calluses on my fingers, and stuff like. But it's much easier to sit down and look at the news and see what's going on. But yeah, I've still got some more songs, and it's like that it's just something I've really enjoyed doing. And again, that sense of when I was a kid, first time I was on stage, in front of an audience, making them laugh. Same thing, man. First time I was on stage with my own songs and having an audience into me, just, oh my God, this is awesome.
Yeah. Well, Ron, it carries over. You can talk about acting, your channel, or your songwriting. A screenwriting teacher told me great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film, great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Probably a pretty big one. I don't know. I mean, it's making the intention clear versus not making the intention clear. I think that kind of depends on whatever project you're working on. That I see plus and minuses for both. Kubrick as a filmmaker, I don't know, man. It's like you watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it's like I see intention all over the place. And maybe that's just me reading into it. Maybe not. And so from a guy who said you don't want to make your intention clear, I'm just like, well, I don't know, man. It's like you make the alienation of space and being out of our green and blue bubble, and how we're not supposed to be there, and it's horrible and awful, and our own devices might destroy us. That's a really nervous and edgy film, and it's about where the human race is headed. And so I'm not supposed to see the intention there. Oh, come on, Stanley.
It's funny, Ron, because in Playboy magazine, Stanley actually was asked, why'd you make 2001? And he said, to convolute McLuhan, to twist McLuhan. But Duchamp said there's no art with
your
listener or your.
Go ahead, you're breaking up.
Yeah, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. So how much are you thinking of your listener when you're writing your song, or you're thinking of your viewer when you're doing your YouTube channel?
I probably 75-80% is thinking about what I want to get across. But yeah, I agree with Duchamp that it is not full art until you've put it in front of a group of people and they're reacting to it in ways that you perhaps wanted or perhaps could have never anticipated, you know. And it's just like the way a work is received, that is the final moment of the creation process, getting it out there. It's like the poets who write their poems that nobody else is ever going to read. I mean, I guess there's a therapeutic value to that, but I would say that it's meaningless unless other human beings are experiencing that too.
Yeah,
It's
this is a series of 3 that can apply to all 3: acting, songwriting, or doing a YouTube channel. Ruth Draper says, the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. Sounds good, but how do you do that?
Well, okay. As a trained actor, we've talked a lot about at LSU. We talked a lot about the notion of connecting with your scene partner. That you're the person that you're playing the scene with is your greatest inspiration more than anything else, right? And what you're going for with that is to create authenticity and realness, whatever that means. It's the old Meisner that Sanford Meisner saying that acting is behaving authentically under fictional circumstances, right? Yeah. And you bring the audience in by just being as real and authentic and true to the moment as a human being as you can possibly be. And as an actor, I think that part's kind of easy, because that's what good theater is, of looking at real human beings engaged in conflict with one another, right? And so I think that, but when you are performing music or when you're speaking to an audience, it's a different connection, that the kind of method acting that I like to do, you're really not supposed, you need to be aware of what the audience is doing, especially for a comedy, right? But you're not directly communicating with the audience, you're putting I'm like, here's my relationship, and it's authentic and real, versus say stand-up comedy or political speaking, or again playing your guitar in front of an audience. You feel a connection with the audience, and if you don't, you're not doing it really well. You need to sort of have your fingers on what the emotional attitude of the crowd is. And going back to the point I made, 3rd grade Christmas pageant, feeling the audience and feeling like I had influence over them because they're right there with me. That fed me, and it's something that I love to do, now doing something on YouTube, the audience isn't even there. So I have to kind of, imagine what's going on. But most of my work has been live performance over the years. So. Yeah.
Well, Leonard Cohen said the only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play for you?
Well, again, to go to acting, the form that I've studied formally, it's always a risk, because if you're going out there and making yourself emotionally vulnerable, emotionally naked, that is a risk in and of itself. Either with a particular risk with the audience, risk with the other actors on stage. So yeah, you need to find that zone of discomfort as an artist, because that's where things really start cooking.
What does courage mean to you now?
Courage to me now means getting the job done even though you're scared to death.
Wow.
That it's if you're not afraid of something you should be afraid of, there's something wrong with you. So I think it's, I don't know, the hero on the battlefield who gets up with bullets whizzing all around him. So like he knows that he may very well die at any moment, but he's going to rescue his buddy or something.
Yeah.
So it's doing what needs to be done in spite of your fear.
Well, Viola Spolin said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. What about the word struggle? Yeah. How do you process struggle?
Well, it's pursuing a goal, or in acting. Viola Spolin, by the way, I've read one of her acting books, and she's freaking awesome. Her work with Second City up in Chicago. But yeah, we want. I mean, that conflict is the soul of drama, and that's generally most of the stories that we consume as human beings have somebody trying to get something done, pursuing a goal and being stymied by it, yada yada.
Yeah. So Ben Ratliff's a jazz writer. He says, I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So me and you could hear Garcia and go, oh, that's Jerry. We could hear Frank. Oh, that's Frank. We could hear Miles, as Ben described Miles in 2 words, fragile and pointed. Coltrane, slightly undercooked and urgent. So if a writer of you respect was going to describe Ron's sound, meaning in your music, in your YouTube channel, in your acting, was going to describe Ron in a couple words, what 2 words would you be honored and say, they got it?
Oh, wow. This might be one of those things where I need to say that I pass, but I'll struggle to come up with something here because with my YouTube channel, I'm trying to get across ideas that are really, really important to me that I think everybody else, needs to know. So as to sort of, the selfishness of it is that I want my understanding of reality to be shared by other people, and I think it's really important. But gosh, what I got to pass.
Okay.
I can't,
well,
sorry, man.
You get back to me, write it in the comments. What 2 words describe Ron? So let's delve into a little political, because I think that's one of your emphasis on your channel. Yeah. Utah Phillips said, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
I don't think anyone's entitled to make the rules. It's got to be something that's rules have to come from consensus, because otherwise it's just oppression. And there are better and worse ways of achieving consensus. There's big problems with how we achieve consensus in this country. That the republic form of our government has left it open to all kinds of influences and etc. that are not part of the consensus. But anarchy as a sort of social philosophy, I just don't. God, was some Ursula K. Le Guin novel about the offshoot. I forget the name of it. There's the anarchist. It was an offshoot. They all left the capitalist planet and went to another planet in their system and formed this sort of anarchic cooperative. And her vision was that progress kind of stopped. And that the culture itself was dogmatic and doctrinaire, and it's like, no, we don't want, and it's one writer's picture of that, and the big punch is that there's a physicist working on the anarchy planet who discovered something really important, and for the first time in like 75 or 100 years, one of the anarchists goes back to the capitalist planet, and I see big, I just don't think it's possible to organize society under terms of anarchy. It's it's too individualistic. You know, that there's this, as being a human being, there is this ongoing throughout the entire existence of humanity struggle between the individual and the group. And for me, in the end, the real question is, how's the group doing? You know, I mean, because also, you know, I mean, everybody, as far as democracy is concerned, you know, large groups of people can have really bad ideas together, you know, so it's not, you know, it's not necessarily that, you know, the people are always right or anything like that, you know, so how do we, go ahead.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Oh, a huge one. I mean, rights are stuff that the collective owes you, you know, the group, you know, you are owed the freedom of speech, perhaps. I mean, and, you know, there are arguments about what those rights are supposed to be, versus responsibility. And yeah, they're perhaps culturally we're too individualistic now as Americans that, you know, I've seen so many people just sit by for the last like 3 decades as the conservative movement has seized more and more and more power, and people, you know, I don't know, is it talking about generations? I think my Generation X, is the great big who cares about it generation, you know, of acknowledging, well, there are these bad social trends happening, but you know what, it's just going to get worse. Why should I care? Why should I even bother? And it's like the answer to that is you should care, you should bother, because it's your country, you know, because you're a human being and you have, you know, a sense of morality about you, and that morality must necessarily include obligations and responsibilities. You know, you have a crappy society if nobody is responsible for anything. What was it William F. Buckley once said? It was in the episode of Firing Line where he was arguing with Noam Chomsky, where it was one of the one or two clever things I've heard Buckley ever say, but it was like, if we're all responsible, then nobody's responsible. You know, and I think that we kind of have that sensibility in the United States, you know, just like, oh yeah, democracy, somebody else has got it.
Yeah. What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Revolution is, I don't even know if there's much. You have rebellion in order to have the revolution, but I see a rebellion as being smaller scale, and revolution as being something that's much larger, you know.
And Ron, that makes sense. In Ron, it goes along. John Basil Barnhill was a socialist. He said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. 2005 film V for Vendetta paraphrase: people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs? You can't have a war on drugs because drugs can't fight, and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So we have this, you know, this false fears like war on drugs, war on poverty, war on terrorism. How do you personally handle these false fears?
You know, some years ago, when I think it was during the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan, around there, I've been a news junkie for many years now. I've had to back off on that a little bit, just because so much of it has been depressing. But I had my ex-wife, my then wife, said to me, "I don't know how you watch and read all of this stuff. How does it not get to you?" And it's like, I think, you know, I get a sense of control through knowledge. It's, you know, sort of it's the more I know about it, I'm able to think about it, I'm able to talk about it, I'm able to be an individual thing, you know, at least having my own opinions in spite of what the rest of the herd is doing, you know.
Well, it's perfect, Ron. This leads perfect. New York Times had an article in 2017. It says the cable news business model this news junkie, just what you talked about.
Yeah.
Conflict means urgency, and urgency means viewers glued to the channel. It's a machine designed to generate stress and negative emotion. And then it goes on, fighting is humankind's most productive state. What is humans' most productive state? Is conflict the human condition?
I think conflict is part of the human condition. But it's not, the conflict versus cooperation. I mean, it's not necessarily the greatest thing, ever. God, tell me, sorry, repeat this question a little bit.
Well, it's more like it is when they say fighting is humankind's most productive state. It's sort of like, what is humankind's most productive state? Is that fight or flight, or is it something else?
Well, fighting is destroying. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, yeah, you produce awesome things in order to destroy, but no, I just don't. It seems just completely contradictory on its face. Yeah. That it's like that there has to be a loser and there has to be a winner. This zero-sum game where I'm not fulfilled unless you're oppressed. It's messed up. Fighting is about destruction, not producing.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Conviction. Although compromise is a very close second.
You actually brought this up earlier. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, English.
Well, I mean, metaphorically, what form is your inner consciousness in?
Something that I do a lot, just thinking, just my mind is, and it might, this might be a problem. I don't know, but I kind of like it. I rehearse arguments in my head a lot, probably a little bit too much, and it's like, and when I can't find somebody to have a good meaty discussion with, I have it with myself, and try to fill in the, so that's going on a lot. There's also music that plays in my head. Just when I'm not arguing with myself, I'm going through whatever song happens to be in my head. And what's fun I've been noticing lately is that one particular song I've got going on will turn into another just because of like a similar key change or something that's happening. But yeah, it's mostly music and rehearsing arguments.
Great.
I've never thought about this before. It's like, well, okay. Yeah. So, right now, here's what I'm telling you.
Beautiful. Two of my film heroes, their mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I'm sorry, ask that one more time.
Is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
It's got to be a little bit of both. It's about the interaction between whatever is in yourself. I mean, one can make the argument that, the self is totally an illusion. But that's what I was saying earlier about where maybe it was before we even went on the air about how human beings are really good at retro justifying actions that they were going to take no matter what, that we don't make choices, so to a great extent, we are these creatures that are very much a product of our circumstances and our environment. But at the same time, there is this thing inside that is mediating, perhaps organizing into a narrative in your head, create, I keep hitting on over and over again. But it's got to be a sort of dynamic relationship between what's inside and what's outside.
Can art making be egoless?
No, impossible. In fact, I don't know that I would even want to experience any art that had no individual ego involved. You know, I mean, if you're trying to do that, maybe you can get yourself to a particular point where you are consciously trying to diminish your ego. Hey, but that's a choice that your ego made. You know, it's sort
point.
of, yeah.
Is perception reality?
No. Simply because it's been shown in so many different ways that perception is right on the mark or not right on the mark, you know. And that happens in politics all the time. And you got consultants scrambling to, how are we going to spin this? You know, what's the big? But it happens all the time. You know, it's in just regular, ordinary life. You know, you have some event happening in a room full of 100 people, and everybody's going to have a slightly different story about what it was that happened. You know, so I'm not.
That's good.
Okay, good.
Now tell me one major element of your creativeness, sort of like Zappa says, conceptual continuity, this thread that's gone through the theater, music, and your YouTube channel. One major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
I think that I've changed, you know, is probably the biggest thing over the years. And I go back, you know, to when I was a much younger man. I told you I was raised Southern Baptist and Republican back during, you know, when it was morning in America, etc. And I was strongly indoctrinated with a lot of those conservative ideas. And it's a joke I've been making for a while, that there's no such thing as a conservative intellectual, that they're an oxymoron. And it's like, you know, all of these, conservatives, there's discrimination against them at the university. And it's like, I look back on my university experience, I never had a single professor telling me, you should believe this or that. It was more that I was given intellectual tools to apply to the world in which I live. And by that particular standard, it's conservative ideas in you know, the academy. They just don't cut it. You know, that when you take about two seconds of the slightest intellectual scrutiny of at this particular point, all conservatism. Go back 20 or 30 years, there was at least some stuff that you could maybe there's a point here, but now it's just so much freaking fantasy. And I've done it. I've lost track of what I was saying again.
No, that's right. Because it morphs into this, actually, Ron. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I'm sure that there are some there. What weaknesses have I turned into a strength? I think that my YouTube show right now is the culmination of many, many years of my trying to fuse my artistic self and my political self into one thing. And originally the original intention is, how can I write political songs that aren't, stultifying and dogmatic, and, songs that actually reach out to people, but aren't so vague that nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. And I've written a lot of political songs over the years, and I found that anger works the best. People really, really like anger as opposed to uplifting, but it's, as an actor in the theater, you're sort of an artistic mercenary. And as much as I love acting, and there is just so much artistry within the specifics of what you're doing there, but I felt constrained by it. You go and you work for a director with whom you may or may not agree on, even philosophical ideas about about what you're trying to accomplish with the show. I mean, going beyond even, simple disagreements about how to play the characters. It's like, what are we trying to do here? Going back to Lynn Sobieski, what does this mean? You even understand what this means. And that has been a slowly evolving and changing process of who I am, and have been trying to work into my artistic endeavors. And so I've got this YouTube show going on right now where I'm just trying to put everything into it. And it's like, I think I'm still a little less on the artistic side and a little more on the political side with my show, but it's like I keep looking for opportunities to expand that, and so my changing nature as a human being over the years, just different ideas that I've had. And, somewhere along the line, I developed anxiety and depression. And I think that that's also played a role in the artistic choices that I make. So it's the way that I've changed, just how I sort of view human life necessarily means that my approach, to art and I guess polemicism have changed, that it's like the anxiety and depression, I think, has given me a lot more empathy and compassion that I did not have when I was younger. It's like I'm looking a whole lot more now toward how to find the good in people, while at the same time continuing, my holy righteous indignation about bad stuff. It's a balancing act, and it works its way into my work.
Yeah, great words, empathy and compassion. You really well done, because you answered the next question is fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when I need to write a song.
Yes, anger works well.
But this one is you create what you resist. It's a saying. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve.
Oh, yeah.
And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So this idea, any thoughts on this idea? You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Ron, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Oh, well, I've seen that in myself. It's like I think I said earlier, you can take the boy out of the church. You can't take the church out of the boy. And that just goes on and on and on and on for, in numerous different ways. I feel like since I renounced being an evangelical Southern Baptist, I guess in the mid-90s, since then, I have very much lived my life in terms of the fact that I am not a Southern Baptist. And that there's just no way to get out of that, that it's like they were there early on creating this original scaffolding of knowledge that's the, if you define it first, then you've got an advantage over everybody else. And so the church was in there with me early on. And so I have lived my life in reaction to that. One of the things that finally caused my break with the Southern Baptist was that I had close friends of mine come out of the closet as gay people when I was in college. And it was, oh, these people are going to go to hell because they're in constant rebellion against God. No way. These are awesome people. They're good people. That's total BS. No way that's going to happen. And it's like I never, as a Baptist, found a way, to work that. So it was like, okay, make or break it, But it just goes on and on. I still believe in love as my great, it's what is my greatest philosophical principle. It is love your neighbor as yourself. And any political philosophy I have, or even that anybody has, needs to be based on that. And if it's not, you're screwing up,
Really well put, Ron. I agree with you. So I asked for 90 minutes and we're going over. Can you do a few more, or you got to get going?
Today's my day off. I've got the time.
Okay, here we go. Few more. How do you find peace of mind?
Sometimes I meditate, but not nearly as much as I think I should. I also smoke weed. Boy, ain't that great. And experiencing art and music is also to just let myself be taken by it, of surrendering myself to the story, and letting that take me away. And it's less about, when you truly give yourself to a piece of music or to a film or to a play or even, a painting or sculpture, when you give yourself to that, then it's about that and way less about yourself. I try not to use my critical brain at the moment of experiencing a given work, although that I don't watch a lot of movies anymore, because there's the question of, do I really want to give myself over to this particular narrative? Do I really want to have these ideas crawling around in my brain? So, but yeah, that's huge.
There's a great line. This lady I knew, she said, when David Lynch's Blue Velvet came out, she says, yeah, it's probably a good movie, but I don't want to spend 2 hours of my life with those people.
Good point. Yeah.
That is a great comment. So this is 5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a couple words. Number 1, who started it all?
Oh, sorry that I'm pausing on this. There's just so many questions. For me, I will say William Shakespeare started it all.
Very good. That's a good. Yeah. I love when people say someone. Okay. 2, are we going to make it?
Yes. Perhaps not as in a thriving way as we are now, but yeah, we'll make it.
3, where do we put it?
On the back burner.
4, who's cleaning it up?
You and I are cleaning it up.
Yeah. 5, is it serious?
It's very serious, but we got to be able to joke about it too.
Yeah. Well, that's Zappa. I'm very serious about being not serious.
Excellent.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Be ready to change everything at any moment.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Under.
Wow. Why?
Because, in my heart of hearts, I think that I might feel a little intimidated by the toilet paper being so far forward when it goes over. I'm trying to come up with a reason right now, and I'm just like, it feels a little safer with it coming from underneath.
That's beautiful, because 90% of people say over. In the past, has it illustrated as going over. But I love when people say under, and they have a reason. So very good. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Searching for Love.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Popcorn.
Oh, I love that smell. No one ever says that. You know what Billy Wilder said? I just hope they loved my movie as much as the popcorn.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
I had a film teacher who actually taught the popcorn theory. He says, if you serve popcorn, people will like your movie more. It's like, duh, that's the history of the movie industry.
It's a full human experience, getting up, going to the theater, I had a Tom Schatz, I took an Alfred Hitchcock film theory course at the University of Texas many years ago, and he talked about about Hitchcock's awareness of how the films were being received, that you are in the dark surrounded by strangers.
Yeah.
So it's more than just the movie, it's an entire experience.
Well, that's actually a question I left out. I mean, I'll add these 2 questions right now. So, well, the question, you already answered it, as McLuhan said, there's no such thing as a good or a bad movie. It's a good or a bad viewing experience.
Wow,
and I think that's totally true, because you just look at the worst director in the history of the world, Ed Wood, people can go and see his movies and have a good time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I took a film and video theory class when I was studying RTF. Janet Steiger, also a huge intellectual influence on me. And so we go through the whole semester looking at feminist film criticism, Marxist film criticism. We were reading, Sergei Eisenstein's stuff on editing and the dialectic, reading psychoanalysis, all, Christian Metz, all kinds of stuff. And so we get, watched all kinds of stuff, experimental film, feature film, foreign film. We get to the end of the semester and she's like, okay, so you all now have the intellectual ability to understand and criticize anything that is put on a video screen or projected onto a screen. So so here's your final project. We're going to watch Plan 9 from Outer Space, and you have to come back with your, with an informed, intelligent, critical reaction to it. And it blew me away. I'm just like, oh my, I mean, I love Ed Wood because he just so casually broke every single rule and didn't care at all. And just sort of like, here, what are you going to do with this? Check it out,
That's good. And so I talked to Michael Apted 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France. But it really flourished in the 80s because of MTV, to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So Michael Apted told me, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with the bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
We're just brainwashed to believe we can. We're having information shot at us more quickly. And I think that our willingness to be patient has eroded, but it's not that we can't be patient. It's not that something has fundamentally changed about the human experience. We're just bombarded with media signals and information. I mean, it's pretty horrible. We, in a lot of senses, that we live in mass media, just all over the place. And I hear people talk about multitasking. It's like, oh, I'm very good at multitasking. And it's like, well, that's good when your computer does that. But when you're multitasking, you're, I guess, getting more stuff accomplished, but you're necessarily ineffective with each of those things that you're trying to accomplish. So we got.
Ron, you have ESP, because that was the follow-up question. Is it literally possible to multitask?
Yeah, but not as effectively as you think you're doing.
Yeah.
So I got to say one thing about the speed of editing. And just, no particular point, but Robert Altman's The Player, where you have that opening shot that is uncut, a really long take while they're talking about, everything has got to be cut. Anyway, it was a nice little sort of meta commentary with that film.
Yeah, you talked about smoking pot. I had the privilege of smoking a joint with Robert Altman once.
Wow, I'm impressed.
He actually made a short film on how to smoke pot.
Oh wow! I wonder if I can dig that up somewhere.
His son, his son wrote the song "Suicide is Dangerous" when he was like 14.
For MASH. Wow, that's he was 14. Awesome.
And he came to me and he wanted me to show as his film. He made a documentary, and I says, dude, I'll show the film if you let us show that short doc or that short film your dad made on hospital. He says, fine. So it's not that big of a deal, but it was cool. Yeah, Altman's a great filmmaker. And so if a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Oh gosh, I would probably want it displayed here in my home state of Texas, maybe in Austin, which has, my experience in Austin was just life altering to me, not just going to school, but living in the city. And I would want that statue to be made of marble. just because I like Greco-Roman art.
Ron, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I've never had and I never want. I never want to be president of the United States of America. Ever.
There you go. It's good. You never had it and you never want it. You answered
Exactly.
it. You know the answers I get the most?
What?
Fame, money, and heroin.
Heroin.
Okay.
Sound that fascinating to me.
Yeah, right. But it is funny. Okay, now, if you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Hey, God damn it! Can't you see that I'm sitting here in a vat of vomit? I don't. He's like, come on, man! You're mixing excrement.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I see millennials and Generation Y, whatever they're called, people younger than me, 10, 20 years younger than me. I see them looking around them and being a lot less taken in by the illusions and the tropes and the conventional wisdom. I see these younger people seeing that the emperor's new clothes are nudity. And that makes me, that's why at least we're going to make it, 50 years into the future. Ask me, we're going to make it. There's, if the conservatives don't destroy it first, if we find a way past global warming, I see a bunch of young people in Western civilization who want a more just society, a more equitable society, and they mean it. And that warms my heart and gives me optimism.
Yeah. How has your theater background morphing into your YouTube channel, how has that shaped your behavior?
I think a lot more about how I might be received than I did because I was a blogger for many years. I started, rolling in my blogger self with my, filmmaking and artistic self for the YouTube show. And yeah, I'm thinking more about my audience and thinking more about my numbers, which it's a drag. I haven't gotten viral in the way that I'd like to be, but I mean, perhaps I'm speaking to a very niche group of people. Not sure. It's like, I did something on Tucker Carlson last week that got, for me, a good turnout, 100 and some odd views, and then turn right around and do something about Trump losing the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit, and I called it Rapist in Chief, and I've only got 5 views on it. It's like, okay, maybe people don't want to hear me talk about rape. I don't know how to respond to that. I was a little surprised that so many people were into what I had to say about Tucker Carlson. So yeah, I think about that. I try not to let it affect too terribly much what I'm doing or me trying to get my ideas across, but it's a concern. It's there,
Anthony Burgess said, we must now ask some very different questions about the relationship between music and life. What question remains unresolved for you? Just in general, about life in general, what question remains unresolved?
I know that there are some. I've been thinking about that. For one thing, I'm an agnostic, to sort of rehash what we were talking about a little bit earlier, that God is an open question to me. I think I'm a big supporter of trans rights, but I think that the nature of what the masculine and the feminine are, if there is even such a thing, remains an open question. That it's like you've got the political need for civil rights and life, to say one thing in support of the trans community. Okay. And then there is I think an even deeper question of, does biology, how does it affect our minds, and in what ways? And I think that it may very well always be an open question. It's very, very mysterious at that point. I don't know that science, because gender is so socially constructed. And what was it? A guy I knew when I was getting my MFA at LSU, he was studying to get a PhD, I think, in performance studies. And he had done his master's thesis at St. John's, I think, in it's a Catholic college in Austin, on queer theory. And so that was my first taste of that as a discipline and as an idea, was conversations with him. And he just straight up said, all gender is socially constructed. And I remember him making a differentiation between gender and sex, that sex is the biological, gender is the social aspect of it, and so I full supporter of trans rights, but I'm still very curious of how does the trans person versus the cis person, what is the emotional and thought process? How do we determine, for a lot of people, I suppose it's easy, I've got the right genitalia, but it's when we have non-binary people, I think we're at a really awesome point as far as that's concerned, where these ideas have sort of bubbled up to the surface, and we're now having a society-wide conversation about the masculine and the feminine, and it's like even the conservatives are in on it. They've got their answers straight across, all of their, the Tucker Carlson pushing testicle tanning for a while there. And Josh Smalley's got a book out now on manliness. This is an unanswered question to me, the great mystery of gender. And it's like I said, I don't know that it can ultimately be answered, but I want to know more about it.
Yeah. So before I ask the last two questions, I learned of your channel through your rap on Frank Zappa, and I'm just curious, what Zappa album or song had an impact on you? Is there, like, when did you experience Frank, and what kind of impact has it had on you? I mean, other than what you said in your YouTube video about him.
Right. I actually anticipated this question just because of your connection to Zappa. And here's a real quick history. My older brother, who was so influential for the music that I was getting into, got me into the Beatles, first was playing Zappa. I would hear it coming out of his bedroom. And Zappa was first to me the funny rock guy, that as like a 7th or 8th grader, being a jerk older brother, he called me into his room. He's like, "Hey, Ron, I want you to listen to this. It's just for you," and played "Broken Hearts Are for Assholes" for me. And I'm just like, what is this? But "Broken Hearts Are for Assholes" is a really funny song. And so that's what he was to me at first. I think somewhere along within a couple of years, a buddy of mine had Apostrophe, and again, funny, but also freaking rocking. I mean, just and Zappa's guitar soloing. So it's like he was so slowly morphing from the funny guy into the funny rockin' guy. And by 1984, I went to see him on the Them or Us tour. And I didn't know most of the material. And it was one of the first, arena shows I'd seen where I barely knew the material. And it blew me away. I think Chad Wackerman was on drums, just incredible. I think maybe Steve Vai was with them at that point, and just the oh God, and unfortunately he had to stop it short because Houston, a couple of drunk guys got into a huge fight on the first row, and so no more encores. It's like later we're done, Wow. And then go to college, and it's like a lot of my friends are listening to Zappa, and just I became a lot more familiar with all kinds of, just from the beginning to the end of his career. And I think Probably my favorite Zappa album is One Size Fits All. But you know, that's not my only extraordinarily loved Zappa album. I think the first time that I became really enamored of his guitar playing was from Shake Your Booty, Yo Mama. Just that, you know, as a cute little, a funny little cute song that is the head for just magnificent soloing, you know, that just goes on and on and on and on. What else? The guitar duet version of Stevie's Spanking that's from the video from Hell.
Yeah.
I mean, at this particular point, I'm like, you've never heard of Zappa? Here, listen to this. It's incredible. You know, so sort of the calling card I use for Zappa now.
Ron, you really covered it well, because it's like he eats, it's comedy music, and then you realize this guy's great and he's a great guitarist. You really covered it well. And I wanted to tell you, when I saw Frank sing Broken Hearts for Assholes in Vegas, of all places, he was pointing at the audience going, "You're an asshole, you're an asshole." Awesome. At one point, he pointed at himself and goes, "You're an asshole," which I thought was the brilliance of Frank embracing contradiction.
It is. Look, I'm a big asshole. Jesus God. Yeah.
He really taught me to embrace contradiction, because it's like, nothing is what I want. He makes fun of it, but that is a line from Roxy, a true Zen saying, nothing is what I want.
Amen. Amen.
Or the line, I like this line, you got to love the cops as they beat the shit out of you on the street.
It's Who Needs the Peace Corps? Yeah. Love that song. I will love everybody.
Now, just to flip it, what's your attraction to the Dead? How did that come about?
The Dead, I'm not a huge Grateful Dead fan. It's the Dead are more something that I'll just like, okay, I think it's time for me to listen to some Grateful Dead now.
Yeah.
It goes back, one of the classic rock bands before they even had the term classic rock. My older brother was into the Dead, and I think I saw them performing the song Alabama Getaway on Saturday Night Live. Speaking of which, that was another Zappa experience of mine, was his performances on Saturday Night Live, which just, oh God. Yeah, both of
them are great. They're really good.
Yeah. And then they banned him because he was being too aware of whatever. Yeah. He was being meta. But the Grateful Dead, some really awesome songs, just radio songs. And I ended up getting to go and see them. They played at Astro World here in Houston. And I think I went and saw them the summer between my junior and senior year in high school, like 1985, maybe. So I relate to the Dead more as a sort of cultural phenomenon, in that I go to Astro World and the place had been taken over by hippies, which by the mid 80s, I'm like, I didn't even know they existed anymore, and yet, here they are all over the place, everywhere. They're in the parking lot selling their Deadhead wares. They're all over the park, and so, went and saw the show, and it was again, as a kid, I was looking to hear the songs that I knew and loved from the radio being played, and they didn't really play a lot of their radio hits, and I was a little disappointed by that. But I was also just blown away by just the, sitting here listening to the Grateful Dead's country psychedelic blues songs, surrounded by hippies, in 1985. And then they released the next year or the year after that, their last hit album, the one that had Touch of Grey on it and West LA Fade Away. Those were awesome, it's I got a lot of the classic bands in my fading teenage and early 20 years. A lot of those classic 60s and 70s bands were putting out their last big hurrahs. And so I got to hear new Grateful Dead songs on the radio. And it's just, they were doing some complicated stuff, here and there, as far as the improvisation is concerned.
Yep.
And
they did some great stuff.
Yeah, as a jazz fan, I noticed the instruments talking to each other and whatnot.
Well, someday we should get into jazz too, but I want to ask these last two questions, but I
Sure.
have to tell you, the two Zappa Dead connections I love to tell people is the Dead and Frank both did a cover version of a sea shanty called Handsome Cabin Boy. It's one of, the only songs that I can think of that they both did, And, it's a great old sea shanty where a woman disguises herself to be on a sailor ship. And the other one is Frank making fun of the Dead when he goes, I'll go to a midnight screening of 200 Motels. Then I'll go see the Grateful Dead and I'll tighten my headband during Jerry's guitar solo for an extra rush.
Yeah, that's a Teenage Win from You Are What You Is. Oh, God.
That is a funny line.
Hilarious.
That is a funny line. Teenage Win is what spawned Thundercat, by the way. He claims that's one of his biggest influences.
Oh, funny.
So anyways, here we go. Here's the last two questions.
All right, man.
Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 2 hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I want to know everything. But of course, that's ridiculous. I can't know everything, but I want to know the things that I perceive to be important, and I want others to know what I've learned. That's what it's all about to me.
Ron, that is so brilliant. It's so appropriate because we have a Dylan event every year. We're tomorrow, a Zoom where we talk about Dylan. And
Sweet.
one of my favorite Dylan lines is, "Don't ever tell anyone everything you know." He got it from the Bible. So, you're at a party and you meet someone and you start talking to him. And like we did for the last 2 hours, we really connected. And I wanted to tell you everything I know. And I wanted to hear you tell me everything you know. So It's like, it is a great aspiration to want to know everything.
Impossible. Impossible, but the journey is more important than the destination.
That's it. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
Well, I kind of hit on this earlier. The most optimism is seeing the younger generations that don't, the old illusions just aren't working on them anymore. And that fills me with optimism, that it's just like you can lie and lie and lie and lie, and ultimately that lie gets worn out, or that lie is no longer close enough to the reality that it's functioning, and otherwise being optimistic is that, I still believe in love as a sort of powerful force that motivates us. And I don't think that that's going anywhere. It takes a beating and then it comes back. But generally I love the human spirit. I think that in American culture and perhaps Western civilization more generally, we're up against the ropes right now. But I really believe that, if we don't destroy the planet, we'll come back.
Yeah. Really well done, because that's the answer I get the most, Ron, is when I ask people what gives you the most optimism, they say youth, young people. And it's encouraging because the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being? I got from Wilhelm Reich, and he said the best thing for a human being is another human being. Yeah. And the last question I got from what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, what gives you the most optimism? And he said, other people. Yeah. So it's sure been fun spending these 2 hours with another person. Ron, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you.
Yeah. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
All right.
Later, dude. Thanks.
Bye-bye, man. It's been awesome.